My son Liam recently had his first birthday. Throughout the year, we wanted to mark his monthly milestones, but do it in a way that was kind of different from what you typically see. So each month I made a spray-painted typographic painting, and we took a photo of Liam lying next to it, which kind of got more and more difficult as he got more and more active throughout the year. The paintings are all based on a custom alphabet I designed a couple years before. Like a lot of alphabets I've designed, the letters are based on a modular grid with repeated geometric shapes. I first created these letters for an event poster where they were layered with translucent 3D shapes and textures. I really like the way those shapes interact and layer to kind of create little complicated areas of detail and that sort of thing. So for Liam's paintings, I modified those letter forms. I added more space between the horizontal and vertical parts of the letters to make spray painting them a little more practical. Over the year, I experimented with different three-dimensional effects. Each month I ended up alternating between two different styles. The first was kind of a beveled effect on flat letters, and then the other one was a 3D version with light and shadow, and I'd alternate between the two each month. Towards the middle of the year, I tried a few other ideas, but I kind of realized that the compositions work best when the letters are all the same size, and they're all treated the same way. So then I just kind of made it more complicated for myself each month as a sort of visual design puzzle in three-dimensional space. For the one-year-old painting for Liam's first birthday, I started by creating a 3D composition of the text in SketchUp. I made 3D versions of all the different letters, and then I rotated them into place with the same angle and lighting that I'd used for the past few months. In this case, I wanted to rotate the middle word, year, so that the secondary shadows that it cast would appear above and below, kind of on the letters on either side. The composition is still pretty simple, determined by the width and height of the words themselves, but those shadows add an extra layer of visual complexity. Once the 3D composition is finished, I place that against the background I've used each month, and I recreate each layer as a stencil I can cut out for a spray paint. I start by extending the letters into 3D space so they all have the same depth. Then I go through the entire composition and I redraw the shadows as individual shapes, so it's a little easier to separate the different parts of the composition into different stencils. The most complicated part of all of this is creating that middle layer, which includes the entire 3D letters except for the shadows between them, since I end up painting that black shadow area first. The finished painting is made up of 3 layers: that black background, the grey 3D layer, and then a white layer on the top for the front faces of the letters. Then there's one final small layer for the shadows that are cast on the front faces of the letters. Then I have to print and cut out each stencil on my little 8.5 by 11 printer, because I don't have a bigger one, and that's all I can do, so I gotta stick them together and then cut them out for each stencil. Next, I need to prepare the board itself for painting. First, I paint the entire board black. Then there's a 1/2-inch border of white around the edge of the board. Then finally, I paint this halftone effect across the middle of the board. This is created using this mesh kind of stuff that's used for tinting car windows. I've done this for each month so far so that they all kind of work together in a series. Once that's done, I spray the black background for the text itself. For this one, I just need to kind of get the stencil roughly in the middle of the board. The other layers are a bit more difficult to line up because they have to be a bit more specific. And then with this layer, there's little bits where I need to block the kind of counters or the open spaces in some of the letters so that that halftone background shows through. Next, I need to spray the grey letter form layer. I end up spending a lot more time taping these stencils down than I actually do painting them, because I want to avoid overspray as much as I can under all the little edges around the letters. Finally, I spray the white layer on top, which is all the front faces of the letters. This one's the hardest to line up because it needs to cover that grey layer underneath completely. I know I'm trying to be a bit more precise with these stencils than the paint really wants to be. That's sort of the trademark of my work, I guess. That kind of overly meticulous nonsense that kind of ends up creating a really interesting final product. While I have the stencil for that white layer still taped down on the board, I can mask out the areas for the shadows on the letters that those overhanging letters cast on each other. This layer I can spray with that same grey paint, but I just do it a little lighter than the other grey layer to give it a little bit of sort of dynamic brightness, contrast, something like that. So once all the main stencil layers are finished and I take the stencils off, you can pretty clearly see that there's some overspray and some other little bits that need to be touched up, which is kind of a side product of working with spray paint, especially in those smaller parts of the letters. So I figured out that the easiest way to fix this is to respray that black background layer using the sort of cut out parts of each letter to block the letters themselves. This final black spray paint layer really helps to define the edges of the letters, and it gives that whole thing a really kind of strong black and white contrast. So here's the finished painting. And here's Liam throwing it around his room while we try to take some pictures of him. Over the year, this has been a really rewarding project. And now Liam already has a good start on a giant pile of wooden rectangular artwork that he has to carry around all the time. So, you're welcome.